Welcome everyone. Nice to see you all. Well, I guess we can't see you all, but yes, I already see some people have already started. If you were here in our first class, you know the drill. Please drop in your location in the chat. We want to know where people are tuning in from. Hello from Iran. Hello from Texas. Welcome everyone. Nice to see some familiar names. Hello from Nairobi, Chicago, Asheville, Toronto, Delhi, Milan, Paris, Austin, Birmingham, Brazil, Maine. Oh, snap! This is amazing. I'm so happy to see all these places in the chat. Welcome, everyone. Mumbai. Oh, my goodness. So many places. I love it. Toronto, Mexico City, Los Angeles. Welcome. Denver, Britain. Welcome, everyone. Philippines. Oh my goodness, so many places now we have to travel to. Morocco. I love it. Ghana in the house. This is incredible. Welcome, everyone. We will get started in a second. You all in for a treat and for our second class. Welcome, everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Washera from the Everyday Projects. As Polly mentioned, we are very excited to host you for our second class of the Essentials. These are free photography classes for emerging and working journalists and photographers. So we're excited to have you today. So just a quick housekeeping. We want to remind you that these are free classes, but we would love it if you made a $5 donation to Black Women Photographers. They're an amazing group and they're doing essential work at this time. So feel free to appreciate this series by helping them continue their mission in supporting Black women and non-binary photographers across the globe. You can visit their website, blackwomenphotographers.com, and you can donate there. Also pop on the Venmo and their Cash App, and yeah, we're grateful for your participation and your community. So we also want to announce to make sure that you've heard that the Everyday Projects has announced our latest grants, our latest photography grant. I'll share my screen just to give you some context. So yeah, we shared, we recommend that for all the photographers who are working in their communities, you can check out the Everyday Projects grant program for photographers. The applications are open till June 7th. So get to applying. There are 2 project grants of $6,000 each. And those 2 grantees will receive mentorship from Stella editors who are Mallory Benedict from National Geographic and Jahan Jalil from The Guardian. We also want to thank our sponsors for this series, the Lenfest Institute and Facebook Journalism Project for supporting this project. Yeah, and we're excited to host the great Andrea Wise. And just before I forget, please register for the rest of the upcoming classes. The Essentials will be going on till the month of June. So make sure to check out the rest of the other webinars that are coming up in the next few weeks. Follow us on social so you cannot be left behind. And you can check out all the opportunities that we will share with you. And yeah, if for our next class, we'll be taught by photographer Nikki Wu. If you're interested in your portfolio being reviewed in the class, please hit us up, and you can submit your portfolio for the opportunity to have your portfolio reviewed during the class.
Amazing.
Cool. So,
thank you for the housekeeping. I dropped all those links in the chat where you can sign up, where you can check out the Everyday Projects grants. And also our friends at Women Photograph, you have 3 days left to apply for their grant as well. And so thank you all. And I think we can get started.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you Everyday Projects and Black Women Photographers for hosting me. This is a very cool opportunity and I'm so excited seeing everybody in the chat from all over the place. That's pretty exciting. So let's see here. I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. All right. So anatomy of a story. What I thought might be interesting here is to talk through a couple of published projects and talk about how those projects came to be and what you can do to sort of position yourself to get assignment work and also to get your personal work published. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a visuals editor at ProPublica, where I am in charge of ideating and commissioning photography and illustration and other forms of visual journalism. ProPublica is a nonprofit investigative newsroom based in the US, and we primarily cover the US, but we do a lot of really exciting projects. And so I will be focusing on photography here, but if any of you here also do illustration and other types of work, like, please let me know because we are open to all of that. And then I'm also one of the co-founders of Diversify Photo. So I've got both of my email addresses up here. You can check those out and please feel free to pitch me or reach out anytime. I love to hear from people. So I'm gonna kind of break published work into these two big buckets. One way to get work published is assignment work, which is work that is sort of initiated by the publication. I'm working at my newsroom and we have a story coming up and I need to find somebody to assign to work on that project. The other avenue is personal work, which is initiated by the photographer. So you are working on something that you really care about, and then you get the attention of an editor, and then we are able to either publish it as is, or we're able to assign, give you an assignment to continue the work or to further develop the project in some way. So we'll start with talking about assignment work. So this is the process for assignment work from my point of view. And I want to just point out that this process varies dramatically from publication to publication. Every editor has a different process, and the process also varies a lot by story. I'm going to kind of talk about it as though it's like a clean formula and a clean sequence of events. And sometimes it works out this way, but sometimes, everything can just vary. So not every story is always the same. So at ProPublica, we usually start stories with a creative planning meeting where we compile the story team. We have the reporter, we've got their text editor, we usually have an audience editor, and we are talking about all of these different types of things. We're talking about what the framing of the story is, if this story is something that is about a particular person who's experiencing something, or is this a story that we're going to frame around a policy decision that is affecting people? In that conversation, we might talk about possible headlines, or trends that the data that we're reporting about might be suggesting, but we're trying to get a sense of what the story is, kind of what is the structure of the writing, how long of a story is it? Is this a year-long investigation that is really deep, or is this more of a quicker turn thing? Who are the key people that are involved in the story? Are we leading with one person where it's really important that we show that person, or are we leading with a place? It's really just trying to get as much of a clear sense from everybody and getting everybody on the same page about what is the overall editorial goal of this story and what is the role of visuals in that story. And in that conversation, or out of that conversation, we start to think about the visual approach. So at ProPublica, again, since we do not only do photography, one of the decisions is this a photo assignment or is this an illustration assignment? Is it a combination of both? Is it neither? Do we want to work with animation? Like, what is the medium that's going to make sense here? And some of that decision comes out of, are there people that we can photograph? Are they doing things that we can photograph? What is our deadline? Is like all of the action of the story taking place in the past tense where we can't see it? Is this like more of an abstract policy-based story where it might be clearer to a reader to see this through illustration? We talk about the art direction, what kind of style for the visuals, what kind of look or what kind of approach is going to really complement the writing best. What is our budget for this? If this is like, a project that a reporter has spent, a year on, then it probably makes more sense for us to invest a larger portion of our budget towards that project, where if it's like a quicker turn kind of daily reporting thing, then we might not want to put as much resources into it if it's not as deep of a story. And then we start to talk about artists. We talk about photographers and illustrators who might be good for this. Then the next step, once we kind of know the direction that we want to go, we start talking about who might be really good photographers or illustrators for this. From this point forward, I will just talk about photography, assuming that, the assignment that we're talking about is one where we've decided to go with photography. So there are a number of things that we're thinking about as we're trying to find the right photographer. But for me, it's really like trying to find somebody who is going to bring their own interpretation of the story, and somebody who has a lot of different things that they can bring. So it's not just a matter of like who is located in the place. It's about like what is most important for this story, and who can we bring who is really gonna be the right fit for this story. Once we've identified the photographer and we reach out to them and we find out if they even are available and if they want to work with us, then there's paperwork, getting contracts, getting a W-9 if they're based in the US, getting a W-8 form, lots of paperwork stuff, but you all have experience with that on the other end as well. And then we try to share as much information about the story as we can with the photographer. So this is probably the point when all of you are used to being brought into the process. If we have a draft of the text, I really like to share the draft so that the photographer is going into the assignment with the clearest understanding of the story and the context in which their work is going to appear, and so that they can also start to like make suggestions about how we can do things. We like to talk to them about the art direction that we have in mind. And I kind of think about all of this as being a little bit like a road trip where you have a certain destination in mind, but then once you bring the photographer in, they might say like, oh, hey, I know this other route that could be really good. So if we don't have a draft, we share an outline. Sometimes, depending on the story, we might get the photographer on a call with the text editor, with the reporter. We might talk about other opportunities. And especially one of the benefits of working with local photographers who, like, ideally, I'm trying to find photographers who not only have like geographic knowledge of wherever the story is taking place, but who also have done some previous work on that topic, so that they might also have, particular expertise that they could advise of, oh, hey, have you thought about maybe looking at this aspect of this place? Or like, oh, I know this person who also does this thing that's related to this, and maybe we could talk to them to try to find people or something like that. Then the pictures happen. I'm going to somewhat skip over this part of the process because I think it's probably the part that all of you are most familiar with. That's where, we have figured out who you're photographing, what you're photographing, how we want you to photograph. Do we want you to be, making portraits, or do we want you to be doing reportage? And, are we giving you a afternoon, or are we able to give you like multiple days? What is your objective, and what kind of logistics do we have to figure out in order to actually just get you out into the field to make the pictures? So now a photographer is out in the world making pictures, they file pictures, and then my role as the editor is to be selecting which pictures to use. For that, there's usually, coming up with a wide edit, which might be, it might be 50 images, or it might be 30 images. And then when we get further along in the process, and especially once we know the headline, and can make sure that we're picking an image that is complementary to the headline, we are selecting the images. And that this is part of why we like to have those framing discussions really early on, because if you think about, I think we've all seen instances where like a headline might be, about some corrupt police officer who did something really bad. And then the image, especially the image that circulates on social, might be a picture of the victim of that crime, but the headline is centered around the perpetrator of that crime. And that's a disconnect where, the image that's circulating looks like it's of the perpetrator until you get into the story, then you find out that it's the victim. So we are always really trying to think as far in advance as possible about who is going to, who is that headline going to center, so that we can plan and make sure that we have an image that is going to be in line with the same intent of the headline. And what's great at ProPublica is that we work really closely with our audience team. So these are discussions that are happening concurrently, and we aren't, scrambling at the end to find a picture that fits their headline. We're working really closely together. And then also we are laying out the story if it is a more visually driven story where we have a lot of pictures, and it's not just a single image at the top and then the text. Then we're figuring out the sequencing. Are we going to have pairs of images? Are we going to have grids? What's that kind of page design going to look like? And I really like to work with the photographer on that. That's something that National Geographic does a lot, that I learned over there, and that I've tried to bring back to ProPublica, and we try to do whenever it's possible, is like actually get on a Zoom with the photographer and like edit together, and get their input on what that page layout is looking like, and what that, how that visual narrative is coming together. And then building the page in the CMS, that's actually, resizing the files, bringing them into the content management system, putting the text on the page, deciding how big each picture should be, like all of that, so that you're ready to publish. And then once you publish the story, then you have to archive the files, and then, process invoices and, work with accounts payable to make sure that the photographer has been paid. So I'm going to give a real world example, and talk about a project that we just worked on recently. So one of our wonderful colleagues, a really, really talented writer named Dua at ProPublica, was working on a story started as a story about an oncologist who was treating a lot of patients who had not gotten cancer screenings that they were supposed to get because of COVID, that they had delayed getting these screenings for cancer. And as a result of those delayed cancer screenings, their cancers had progressed. They hadn't gotten treatment as early on as they ideally would have. So for that story, at first we were just trying to figure out, what is the story? Is this a story that is really about the oncologist? Is there a patient who is battling cancer who we're kind of centering? Like, who is the focus of this story? And it started out focused on the oncologist, and then Dua found a really incredible woman named Teresa, who was working at a candy factory. And then when COVID hit, she was picking up a lot of shifts, and she did not was not able to go and get screening when she noticed a lump in her breast that was growing. And so she did not get treatment in time and now has stage 4 cancer. So we had to figure out, all right, how is the doctor still a very significant character in this story? Is this more about Teresa? Do we need to see Teresa and Dr. Khosla? Or do we only need to see Teresa? As Dua continued with her reporting, she started to realize that Teresa's son, Sergio, was a really, really significant part of this story. He had kind of put his dreams of going to medical school on hold in order to take care of his mom and to work and to financially support the family since his mom could not work anymore. And that, so he was not just a very significant player in this entire story, but the story was also going to be talking about like the strain that all of this was taking on Sergio. So we're thinking about, what is the story? Who is the story centering? We finally realized that Dr. Khosla, Teresa, and Sergio were like these 3 primary people that the story, or who were going to be carrying the story. We talked about what do we want to be communicating with visuals. We talked about, the way that cancer patients are often portrayed and how they can very easily be portrayed as looking like victims or looking very weak. And that actually Teresa is this like incredibly fierce, really, really strong woman. And she is fighting this thing and she's up against a lot, but we really wanted her personality and her strength to come through. So we wanted to be really mindful about finding a visual approach that was going to be communicating her strength. We wanted to communicate Teresa and Sergio's relationship, the strain that all of this was placing on Sergio, but also his like incredible fortitude in just like selflessly doing what he needs to do to help his family. We wanted to communicate the role that the oncologist has. We also talked about what the story structure is going to be. At one point, it became pretty clear that Dua's writing was going to sort of weave between chapters about each one of these characters. So we started to think, okay, well, maybe we lead each character or each section with a strong portrait of Dr. Khosla, and then we go into Dr. Khosla's story, and then a strong portrait of Teresa, and then we go into Teresa's story, and then a strong portrait of Sergio, and we go into Sergio's story. We started to learn a little bit later in the process that there was going to be a section in that structure. There was going to be a section with Sergio and Teresa's stories kind of intertwined together. So we knew that it was important to not just see Teresa and Sergio separately, but to see them together. We're also thinking about what can we do safely. This story started to come together around February or March. It was in Chicago, Illinois. It's wintertime. We're dealing with somebody who has stage 4 cancer. In COVID, we don't want to send a photographer into her home and potentially risk getting her sick when her immune system is compromised. We actually had we first came up with an approach that involved remote photography because that seemed like the safest approach that we could go. And then as the story sort of developed and evolved a little bit, then further into the spring, we realized that it was really important to get somebody who could photograph in person. And now that it was like around April or March or April and it was springtime, that we could safely do photography outdoors while still keeping some distance. We're also thinking about what can we photograph? What if we want to see Teresa, how does Teresa spend her days? And in this instance, she spends, she's not physically able to do as many things. She's not able to go to work. She's not able to do a lot of stuff. So then we have to think about, well, what is an approach that we can take to show her in a like active, really strong way when there's not a lot of like activity that's happening. And, you know, what is the best medium for this? We decided that photography was really important because we wanted to actually see everyone. And then once we've thought about all of those things, then we start to think about, well, who is in the area? You know, is there somebody who's local who would be able to do all of these things that we've been talking about and who would really be the right fit for this story? And, you know, and I think that like it is often really, really important to hire somebody local, but depending on where you're working, especially if you are working in like more remote parts of the country, you know, there might be somebody who has left that area or who like really has a particular expertise on a particular topic, but they aren't local. And in that case, you might weigh that and decide that it's worth bringing in somebody from out of town. In this case, you know, Chicago, Illinois, there's a ton of really great people. We were able to hire somebody local, but for me at least, the decision about who to hire always starts with like who's actually in that area. And then, you know, as part of that too, like what are the different aspects that what are the things that we would be looking for in a photographer to make sure that they would really be able to connect with the family. So language was a really important thing here. Teresa primarily speaks Spanish. We knew it was really important to find somebody who could speak Spanish fluently with her. And we also decided that we wanted to do looping video portraits. So we needed somebody who could work in motion. And so this was like the art direction that we sort of landed on. Looping video portraits. We wanted to convey an overall sense of like this calm and this kind of waiting game, the tension of this like this slow like progression of this disease. It's not, you know, a fast-paced kind of thing. We wanted visuals that would convey that same like emotional tone and also the pace of life, which is like this just like relentless burden that's placed on this family and that Teresa and Sergio have to be going through, that it just does not like let up. That Teresa and Sergio's relationship was really important. The strain that all of this was taking on Sergio. We came up with a shot list, which actually evolved a little bit. You know, we started out with Teresa alone. We knew that she had tattoos that were really significant for her. And we knew that Sergio was important. And this is like an evolving process. So we first sent the photographer out for, I think, 2 days. And then as the reporting progressed a little bit, then we realized we needed to send him back. I think we ended up sending him back 2 or 3 more times to get some more stuff. So we landed on Alex Garcia, who is really wonderful. He used to be a staff photographer at the Chicago Tribune. We wanted to work with him because we knew that he had really, really strong reporting instincts and that he also has a lot of experience working in very sensitive situations and that he would be respectful and be able to really connect with the family, and that he just like knows how to make visuals that are both really strong but also really respectful, and you know, can work in those sensitive environments. He has strong stills work, but he also has really strong motion skills. He's based in Chicago. He speaks Spanish fluently. And on a more personal note, he has seen what cancer can do to families. You know, it's not a requirement of every assignment that the photographer have like a personal connection to the topic, but I think that the more like personal experience somebody has with whatever you're asking them to photograph or whatever story you're asking them to tell, you know, that's one more thing that they can bring to the story. So this is where we ended up, and I will show the published story. So we ended up, sorry about that. My browser bar is up. So A crisis of undiagnosed cancers is emerging in the pandemic's second year. We led this with this really incredible video portrait of Teresa. You can see her tattoo. And we just really felt like Alex completely nailed this strong, contemplative, really powerful leading portrait. It kind of says it all. So then the story goes into talking about what Teresa has been through, how her cancer developed, and then we go into Sergio's story. So because we knew that this section of the story was going to kind of transition from focusing on Teresa to now shifting the narrative over to Sergio's experience. This was Alex's interpretation of that, and the rock focus, I think, works really beautifully here. It's not just like an interesting visual component, but it mirrors the structure of the text here. So now we go into Sergio was in college before he learned a term for what he had been doing for as long as he could remember, language brokering. So how Sergio has been supporting his mom for, really his entire life. And then we go into Dr. Kosla's experience. And so I can stay on here for a second. So similar approach, but just getting a moment with Dr. Kosla. And then now we go back into the family and the really like what Sergio is experiencing. I'll just read. Sergio was driving his mother home from another physical therapy appointment in February when traffic stopped for a train. Sergio, beginning to fall behind at work and thinking about all the unanswered emails and Slack messages waiting for him, bounced his knee and checked the time. Ever since that night at the ER, he had ricocheted from his mother's medical appointments to his job, to the grocery store, to dinner duty, to filling Teresa's prescriptions, to picking up the cake for Aurora's birthday. He thought he might erupt. I try to be honest with myself and transparent and aware of my own capabilities, he said, but I just started feeling the weight of everything at once. He waited until he had dropped his mother off at home, circled the block to find a parking space, shut the door to his room, and signed off from work for the day. Then he looked up to make sure his door was closed, to muffle the sound, and cried into his sleeve. So just like Sergio trying to like hold it all together and not show his family, the immense strain that he's under, the importance of his car as being, this place where he spends a lot of time driving, and also like this one place where he has time alone. I think that Alex interpreted that incredibly well with this just like really quiet portrait of him in this environment. And then we go a little further into Teresa's diagnosis and finding out that her cancer is not going away. So we were able to send Alex back for an appointment that Teresa had. And we talked a lot about like whether to include this one, because this one does show Teresa in the context of being a patient, and again, like not wanting to show her in a position of weakness, but we still felt like her strength really comes through here, and just the way that she's kind of holding it together and processing what's going on, and just like the body language in her hand, I think says so much. So that was that story and how that came together. Let me switch back here. So some things that you can do to, I think assignment work is tricky because, if you want assignment work, to a certain degree as a photographer, it's outside your control. You know, you can't make editors hire you, but some things that you can do to kind of position yourself to get more assignment work, keep your website and social media updated, you know, knowing your location, being able to really easily reach you is really important. I think that for me, it's always really helpful to see what people are interested in and if they have any special skills. So having that on your bio page, you know, if there are certain types of stories that you're really passionate about, put that in your bio page. So that, you know, if I don't know you, if I've never worked with you before, I can see, oh, you're interested in agriculture. Okay, now I'm going to keep you in mind for the next story that I have that has to do with agriculture, or whatever it might be. You know, if you have special training for working in hostile environments, I don't do a lot of assigning in those types of environments, but it's good to know, you know, if you have that training, or if you can do underwater photography or drone photography or any other types of special skills, put that out there. A big thing is to show the kind of work that you want to be hired to make. You know, because I want to hire people to make the work that they love to make. So I want to find people who have a visual approach and a topical interest that is going to align with what I'm trying to hire them to make. So yeah, just show the work that you want to be hired. You know, if you don't really want to be hired to do sports, then you might not want to have a sports portfolio on your website. Networking is really huge. You know, there are so many things that you can't necessarily glean from somebody's website. Like I'm often really thinking about somebody's personality. And, you know, if somebody has like a really gentle, kind demeanor, if that's something that's gonna be really important for a particular story, or if somebody, you know, I don't know, just like knowing people's personality, kind of getting rapport, that's really helpful. So portfolio reviews are great, conferences, festivals, any opportunity to just network with people, to get your name out there, get your work out there. And then pitching is really important. I'm going to talk about pitching a little bit later, but pitching is really a good, useful excuse to reach out to editors. So if you are like constantly thinking about stories and pitching them, and that also, like every time I get a pitch, that tells me a little bit about how a photographer thinks and what types of topics they're interested in. And even if I can't pick up a pitch, you know, that's something that like I'm filing away. And then, you know, I might then have a story that's related to something that you pitched and be like, oh, you know, Polly just pitched me a story about pesticides. And, you know, now Polly's the person I want to hire because I have this other story about pesticides. I think finding excuses to reach out to editors, but like meaningful, useful excuses is really good. I don't necessarily recommend just reaching out saying, hi, I'm so-and-so, you know, I'm based here or there, although you can do that. But you know, if you relocate to a new location, that is definitely a useful thing to let editors know. If you have a pitch, then that's also a useful excuse to reach out. If you know, saw that editor, you saw some published work that editor worked on and it like really resonated with you, and you can send like a note, just anything that doesn't feel like you're reaching out to just say, you know, hey, hire me, please, can be really good. And then also don't take silence as rejection. There is often just a really, you know, I might not hire somebody for a year after finding them, and it might have nothing to do with like them not being right. It's just a matter of like, I didn't have a story in your location, or I just didn't have any assignments that had to do with what your interests are. And it might take a year or 2 years or 6 months before the right story comes along for you. So, you know, not hearing something from an editor doesn't mean that editor doesn't like you or doesn't like your work or doesn't want to work with you. It might just, you know, it takes time for the right story to come along. And then the biggest thing that you can do to get assignment work is to make personal work. So now we'll talk about personal work, and I realize I'm kind of going over time a little bit, so I'm gonna try to go a little bit faster. So I want to talk about how you can make personal work and get personal work published. So real world example here. Last year, I was on the history and culture desk at National Geographic. And so I was working on, stories about, well, history and culture. And I came across this photographer, Rashad Taylor, on Instagram. I got his permission to share our DMs here. He, at the time, had not yet worked with National Geographic. I had never worked with him before, but his work was awesome. He does wet plate collodion process, which is like not a process that a ton of people are still doing. And so I just really loved his work. He had some like behind the scenes videos of him working on his Instagram stories, and it was really cool. So I reached out to him to ask him if he was working on any projects, and who I was, and that I just would love to like talk about whether we could like work together. So he told me about these 2 projects that he was working on. And then, we took the conversation over to email, got on Zoom. And what really drew me to him is, obviously the photographs were really strong. That's like the number one thing. His stories they were really personal stories that were connected to like bigger issues, bigger topics, but they were rooted in that really personal narrative. He was working in an interesting process. Also for National Geographic, National Geographic's audience is really interested in photography itself. And I thought that audience would be interested in this like very old historical process. So that was also a big plus. But then also like his process was connected to the storytelling. There was like an editorial purpose for working in that process, with kind of connecting the past and the present. So that kept it from feeling like a gimmick. And then also his projects were really timely. So he was working on stuff that had to do with Black identity, Black fatherhood, his experience in this country, and racism and like historical oppression, and really, really big topics, but topics that people were like acutely interested in are still interested in. But like for being on the history and culture desk, having like present tense stories that are taking place now that are connected to history was really important for that audience. So we worked together to develop a pitch. We talked about this big picture project goals. He has a project called My America that he's still working on. That's about his experience as a Black man in America. We kind of decided that was too big of a project to pitch right away, at least, we decided to think about like what are the individual chapters that kind of make up that project, and what was maybe one chapter that we could start with, that we could pitch this one chapter. At National Geographic, sometimes print stories will be these like larger features, and then there will be smaller parts of those features that are pulled out and run as individual digital stories. So we talked about that approach possibly being a good one. Also because his process is a very expensive and labor intensive one. I thought that doing one piece of it where, we could kind of prove that he could pull this off and do it, then that could be something that we could build on. So we narrowed the scope of this larger project to look at this one aspect that he wanted to explore, which had to do with the history of the military and of the history of Black military service, and how we could sort of frame that. At one point, we were thinking about that as being the role that the military has played in the creation of the Black middle class. Also this tension, because he comes from a family that has a lot of military service. So like the generational aspect of military service, the economic mobility role of military service, but also like some of the racism and discrimination that his family members experienced while serving, and that in America, Black people were serving in the military alongside white people, when then coming back after their service when segregation was still legal. So there's like a very interesting history there that we thought we could explore. So we put together just a really simple PDF that I could share around with other editors that had a couple of paragraphs about what we were proposing to do, what the story was, and we included some of his sample images. And then I sent that around to different editors. I pitched that for print, I pitched that for digital, and then also pitched that to the Instagram team to do some like behind the scenes about his process. And then politely pestering people was a big part of it, which is just like following up, because everybody is always busy. So a big part of it is just like, hey, just checking in about this pitch. Have you had a chance to read it? Or like, hey, could we talk about this? So then once the pitch was approved, then we talked about, the shot list. Who should we be photographing? Where should we photograph? What are the concepts we want to convey? What access do we need? This was a story that also had to do with military service. Some of his family members were active duty. We wanted to photograph on the base. What do we need to do in order to get access on the base? How much time does he actually need to do this? Does he need an assistant? What are his expenses? How is he going to get there? What are the safety considerations that we're going to have in mind for COVID? And then because he's working in an analog physical process, we also had a lot of conversations about scanning the plates while he was there, scanning them before and after varnishing, and then also how are we going to archive the files, having him transmit the files before traveling, just in case anything happened to the physical plates. And so once we kind of knew all of that, then we could come up with a budget. Then we got budget approval, then had to find a writer. And so that was all a process, but it ended up resulting in this really beautiful work. So the framing ended up being kind of centered more around the photography itself. Old-fashioned images evoke the complicated history of Black military service. For Black Americans, the military can offer opportunities and the chance to serve, but a legacy of inequality remains. And this is Rashad's cousin, Vanessa. And I just like flipped my shit when I saw this file come in, because it is so beautiful. So Rashad made all of these images. We got on Zoom together and edited, laid the story out. We had talked about, this is the cemetery where his great uncle, it's been a little while, so my memory's not as sharp. His great uncle is buried, who served in World War II. And we talked about, the importance of that generational legacy and how we could show that, and that we could show that by seeing the cemetery. This is his cousin, Valerie, whose grandfather and great-grandfather also served, and that she also served. So he did an incredible job. I think it's really amazing work, and that is how that story came together. Oops, sorry, I keep stopping my screen share. Okay, so some tips for personal work. Big thing, make the work that you want to be hired to make. Rashad probably would not have been hired to make this story if he wasn't already making this work and like putting it out there. I think it's really important to pick work, personal work that really fuels you. I know that when I was a photographer, I felt a lot of pressure to make projects that I thought editors would be interested in. And sometimes that meant making work that actually was really draining for me. And it wasn't the work that like fueled me, or that like I was particularly passionate about. So the work that the creative or the personal work that you create is going to be the work that you attract people to. You are communicating that this is what you want to do. So make sure that it's work that you want to be hired to make. It's work that really fuels you. Personal work is a really great opportunity to experiment with different lighting techniques or different like photography approaches. You might not want to take the risk of like trying a completely new approach on an assignment, but you can prove these different things that you can do, these different new skills that you can make when you're doing these personal projects. I think it's really good to share a few images and some behind the scenes stuff on social media, just so that people know what you're working on. But I would be really careful about not sharing the entire project, because some places, this varies, it's not the case everywhere, but some places do want to only publish exclusive work. So if you've already published the entire project on your Instagram feed, that might limit your potential audience of places that would be interested in publishing it. But on the flip side, if you don't share any of the work, then you're also going to be limiting your audience, because people might not actually know what you're working on in order to be interested in possibly working with you to publish it. I would highly recommend making a private gallery on your website so you can share with editors a link where they can see more of the work without it being public. And like, I think that sometimes photographers feel like they have to have a project fully resolved and completely done before they share it with editors. And I don't think that that's the case. I think that, there are some times and some places where you might finish a project and then they like just publish the completed project. But I think more often you might have a project that you've started and then somebody hires you to either, further develop one part of it, or to finish some more of it, or to just like make new work that is related to it. So I would encourage sharing work in progress. I think if you've got like a few images and you have a start to it, I'll talk in a second about pitching, but you can just say, hey, this is something that I'm working on, would love your feedback or your advice, or to know if like you're working on anything in line with this. Just don't feel like you have to have it completely finished and totally polished before you start sharing it. Show that personal work during portfolio reviews, and then again, like pitch the projects, the personal work that you want to make. I think you can sometimes pitch work that you have not yet started, or you can pitch work that you have started. So some tips for pitching. I think email is best. I don't recommend pitching by Instagram direct message or Twitter or anything, although you can certainly use those avenues to reach out to somebody and ask them if you can send them a pitch and ask them what their email address is. But I think an email that just has like a couple of very short paragraphs that gets right to the point. What is the story? Why does this story need to be told now? Even if you're not pitching an outlet that is particularly like news sensitive, you still want to convey some sense of urgency so that somebody knows that like they need to respond to your pitch now and they need to make a decision now. And, this is a priority, because otherwise, if it's just like if there's no urgency to it, then it's very easy for projects, even if you're interested in the project and you want to publish it, for it to just logically like fall behind other things that are really urgent. So conveying why, what is timely about it? Why does it need to be told now? Why is this story relevant to this audience? Why are you the person who should be telling this story? What is the unique perspective that you bring, or what is like your particular expertise on the topic? What would you photograph, or how would you photograph it? I have gotten a lot of pitches from photographers who have really great topic ideas and tell me about something that's happening that they want to work on, but they haven't thought about like, well, what would the actual pictures be? So I have no sense of like, what are they proposing to photograph? And that can be really difficult. So, showing that you've thought about like how to translate some like big abstract topic into pictures that will tell the story is really, really good. Also in that pitch, tell the editor if this is something that you've already started, if this is something that you have access to, if this is something that you are just interested in working on, and most importantly, what do you actually need? So, you know, I think if what you need is like 2 days to, you know, go and photograph this thing and this thing and this thing, say that. Or if what you need is like guidance on what the next steps should be, or, you know, the photography is done, but you need a writer who can kind of like flesh out the narrative. Be very explicit about what you're actually asking for. And then also follow up, you know, every few weeks or every couple of months, you know, hey, just checking back in, you know, wondering if you're still interested in this. Like, I think being persistent in that way is really good. And then again, like, don't overthink it. I think that one thing that I realized when I became an editor is that, you know, I mean, like, white men pitch a lot more. I think that there's like less self-consciousness around pitching by a lot of white male photographers. And I think that that accounts for some of the disparity in work that we see created. And like, I think that women and non-binary people and photographers of color, it's not that like we necessarily hold ourselves to a higher standard, but I think that there's like more of a feeling that like we have to have all of the answers and have like a project be perfect in order to then take the next step of pitching it. And I think that just like, don't be too attached to your pitches, and just like pitch often, pitch a lot of different ideas. Like, if you are somebody who, you know, every few months is pitching an editor like a new interesting idea, like every few months that editor is like aware of you and is thinking of you and knows the types of stories that you're interested in. And I think that that can only increase the chances that one of the pitches will be picked up, or that that editor will, you know, think of you the next time that they have an assignment that's relevant to you. So yeah, that is all I have. But these are two of my email addresses. If you want to reach out to me about a story that you think that ProPublica would be interested in, you can reach out to me there. If you want to reach out to me about Diversify photo stuff, or just like broad, not work-related things, there is my Diversify email address as well. And I would love to hear from you. So now I'm gonna stop this screen share. Okay.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for all your advice and tips. I'm seeing a lot of great questions in the chat, a lot of thank yous in the chat. That was so helpful. I think we can get started with the Q&A. We can just put you in the hot seat.
Sure, let's do it.
So on that note of pitching, while we're still here on this topic, you mentioned how to follow up, how often follow up. Someone asked along the same lines, can we pitch same work to multiple editors at a time?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think that there are different opinions about that, which I know these things would be easier if there were like hard and fast rules. I would say that some editors really do not like if you have pitched multiple places. My opinion is that you have to look out for yourself and your own interest, and the chances of any individual place, like let's say there's a 10% chance that any given outlet will pick up your pitch. But if you pitch to 50 places or to 5 places, then you have a 50% chance that someone is going to pick up that pitch. So I think that it's fine to pitch to multiple places, but I think that it's really important to be completely transparent. Like, do not lie to anybody. Do not present it as though you are only talking to them. I think that if there's one place that you really think is like the best partner for a story, then, you know, tell them that like you would prefer to share it with them. You're also talking to other outlets. You know, I think that there are instances in which knowing that another outlet is interested can also create some urgency that can actually like help an editor sell that story. I know that that has happened to me, where I've been able to say, hey, I think that we have this amazing opportunity to work with this photographer. I know that like Time magazine is also interested, and then that can like induce some competition of like, oh no, we really want to get it, so we'll commit now, versus just saying like, oh yeah, what, maybe, like, let's see what happens. So I think it's fine to pitch to multiple places, but I just think it's really important to be transparent and let people know that you've also shared it to other people, or shared it with other places. And probably most importantly, if you've pitched to one place and then somebody else picks it up, go back and let that first place know that it's no longer available, because like it's a really really awkward position to be in as an editor if you're advocating for trying to get approval for something that you've been pitched, and then you do get approval and then you find out that the work's no longer available. That's like not really a fun position to be in.
Definitely not. Gonna keep on with the same topic here, pitching. A few other follow-ups questions. Um, can you please also guide how to follow up politely when you don't get a reply? You mentioned that 4 to 6 weeks could be a best practice, or a few months. For you personally, what do you prefer when you have someone following up for you? How long should they wait? Is it 4 to 6 weeks? What do you prefer personally?
I think it depends on the type of story. I mean, I think that if you can follow up with like project updates, then there's really no, if there's some big development in the story, oh, hey, I pitched you this thing 2 weeks ago. I just found out that XYZ thing is happening. I think it would be like a really amazing opportunity for telling this story. Just wanted to check in and see if you think it would be possible to do that. Or 4 weeks from now, hey, just wanted to follow back up, let you know that I've now also photographed this person and that person. Like the next things I think I'd really like to see are, whatever it is, like sharing sort of the updates about where you are with the project or where the project is. Like I've gotten pitches in the past about like, oh, we anticipate that some big like news event thing is going to happen. And this is important because it affects this community. And we'd like to do a story about that community. And then like several weeks later, if you follow back up and say, oh, hey, the bill passed, and so now we're looking at this happening, or, oh, the bill did not pass. So I think that like you can just follow up to say, is there any like forward motion on this, or just checking on the status? Do you think that it's likely that this is going to work out? But I think that like you can't really run the risk of like being too persistent if every time that you reach back out, you're giving like additional information, additional context, like something that's like useful in making that decision.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard some editors say they don't like links because, with their different email companies and it gets filtered as spam or whatever. For you personally, do you prefer a link or a PDF of images when someone is pitching?
I mean, I would say do both. I know that like embedded images, some people like embedded images, but also some workplaces block embedded images as like a spam filter thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, sometimes like you're not supposed to open up email attachments that are coming from senders that you're not familiar with. I think that I prefer links personally, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every editor does. So if you attach a PDF that has stuff and then you also have a link, then you kind of have your bases covered regardless of what that person's preference is.
Awesome. Jessica asks, is it common for independent/freelance editors to pitch to staff editors at publications? Would they follow the same general pitch tips as photographers?
Would that is that a freelance editor pitching a project or pitching their services as an editor?
Question. I think maybe they're interpreting it as maybe they're an editor wanting to. I don't know, Jessica, if you can add additional context for your question. Okay, she says
Oh,
project.
pitching projects. Um, I don't necessarily know how to answer that. I was a freelance editor for a very long time, for many, many years. I just started
Mhm.
at ProPublica in January. I don't think that I ever pitched a project as an editor. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it, but I'm not really aware of if that's a thing that like yeah, I mean, it can't hurt. Like it at
Mhm.
the end of the day, if you have an idea that you think would like add value to a place or would be of interest to a place, like the worst thing that happens is somebody says no. So I think you should totally pitch it. But I'm not really sure if there's like I'm not aware of like an established precedent at a lot of places for receiving like project pitches from editors. Um, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. And that could be a really good excuse to, let somebody know that you are a freelance editor and that,
Mhm.
you're available to be hired if they have a need for freelance editors.
Definitely. There are quite a few questions relating to the beautiful work from Alex and that project that was shown. One person asked, how are video portraits done? Multiple photos put together or video clips? Um, are you able to give any insight in that process?
Yeah, so for Alex's project, those are individual video clips that then we run as looping MP4s. Um, so if you want to take that approach, you definitely want to have a conversation with the outlet about what their CMS can handle. Some outlets can't do looping video. Some outlets can only do looping video if it's a GIF, and GIFs are really, really difficult because the files are very big and the color space is very small. And so it's really hard to have like a full color range that you would want in video, and have it not look kind of terrible as a GIF unless it's like extremely, extremely short. So some of that is like a matter of like what's best for the story and what is like the creative vision, but it's also like what is the technology that that outlet's CMS can handle. So we just like upgraded our CMS at ProPublica and now we can do looping MP4s. And so that was very exciting and we were thrilled to be able to like really try it out with this.
That's great. One person says, I'm always curious to know about the quality of motion work you would expect from a still photographer. I know I could deliver decent video footage, but I always feel I should say no because the motion is never going to be the quality of my still work. Any advice on that end?
Um, I mean, I don't really hire people to do anything that I don't like have confidence that they could do really well. So like I mean, and I know that like there are I know that there are outlets who hire still photographers and just like ask them to also do video as like an aside thing, and I personally don't think that that's the best approach. I think it is like really difficult for photographers to do stills and video and like for both of them to be of the quality that they would be capable of doing if they were focused on one or the other. But I would say that like if somebody is hiring you to do something, if somebody's asking you to do motion, then it means that whatever you have on your portfolio, whatever previous work you've done, means that they have confidence in you. So I wouldn't like say no to something because you don't have the confidence in yourself to do it. I would say yes. Now, if you want to say no because you know that like having your attention split is gonna, or you're not comfortable doing video, then that's one thing. But like, you know, in the Alex example, I've seen Alex motion work before and I knew it was really good. And so, so my expectation is that the motion work that he's going to do for this assignment is going to be of the same quality that he has done previously.
Great.
But I also I'll just add that like I don't expect that just because I've seen a still photographer's like still work that they can just like magically also do video. Like they're very different skills. Just like I don't expect somebody who can do really good video to also be able to make really good photographs unless they've shown that they can do that.
Absolutely. So you showed incredible work from Alex, incredible work from Rashad. One person asked, what happens if the photographer doesn't get quite the shot you want? What happens then if the photos don't come back like what you imagined? Do they do a reshoot? Any insight on that?
That is a tough situation that fortunately does not happen very often. I think that sometimes when that happens, it's because I have not done my job properly. Like maybe I haven't properly figured out what the photographic opportunities are, or I have, like, I think a lot of a photographer's success is up to like the job of an editor to like set them up for success, to make sure that they have enough time, to make sure that there's, that the person they're going to photograph is open to being photographed, that, I'm not asking somebody to make a week's worth of work in one day or something like that. So I think that, like, for the most part, if I've done my job well in sort of researching and planning in advance, and then like researching the right photographer, then that is not really an issue that comes up. But there are instances where, maybe I have had situations where like the person that was supposed to be photographed just like didn't show up. And so then we have to come up with another plan. I think that, depending on the deadline, sometimes you can send the photographer back another time. There are like extremely rare instances where you might have to send a different photographer back. But those are like really, really, really rare instances.
Good to know. Along the lines, going back real quick to the combination of stills and video, like if you were to do a combination like Alex did, what would the rates look like? Would it be, like you're getting charged for two separate works? I don't know if you were able to have any insight on that.
Sorry,
So if you were doing like a motion, like what Alex did, what would the rates look like? Would it be like compensation for both stills and video, or is it packaged as one?
So for Alex, I think that we actually did a project fee. So sometimes we work on a day rate, or sometimes we'll do a project fee. We did pay a higher rate for motion work than for still work, in part because of it being like an extra skill set, and also because there's a lot more like post-processing that's involved in working with video than in stills. But I think that it really just varies place to place. And so, you should approach those conversations by asking for, what you need in order to like feel really good about the assignment. And I think that, if you are being asked to do stills and video, then I would definitely ask for more money than if you're only being asked to do one or the other. But in general, I think that rates are a bit higher for motion work than for still work.
Thank you. And I know we are coming close on time, so I'll try to sneak in two more questions. One person asks, if they don't have a strong CV, like they may never shot an assignment before, or excuse me, photographed an assignment before, what could they do to get on your radar then, or how can they improve in order to, one day get hired for a publication?
That's personal work. Like, do the personal work. I mean, Rashad hadn't done a ton of like editorial assignment work when we worked together, but it didn't. I mean, he had a really strong CV, especially in like the fine art world, but he hadn't worked with a ton of editorial outlets, or like done that kind of like assignment work before. But it didn't matter because like he had already proven that he could do the work through the personal projects that he put out there. So I think that like ultimately it's about the work. If you are producing a lot of really strong personal work, then I know that you can do that stuff. But you know, if you are getting like your first assignment, nobody gets experience doing assignment work until they start getting assignment work. So I might not uh, I might not hire somebody who has very little experience on like something that has to run on a very short timeline that is very, very high stakes. I might try to put somebody who's a little bit more green on something where there is a little bit more time, and where I have enough time to like make sure that I can talk to them about the process and make sure that they like fully understand all of the expectations. But yeah, I work with people of all experience levels.
And one last question.
Oh yeah, and definitely, as Austin said in the chat, one thing you can do to
Yes.
help improve your skills is make sure you watch all of the webinars of the essentials. Yes.
Exactly. And I know there's other questions relating to pricing and funding and things like that. And trust me, that's what the other classes are for. So we will touch on that in those other classes. Your whole presentation kind of spoke on this already, but do you have any last tips on how to best illustrate that we do visual storytelling, or just any closing tips for the class?
I think the one thing that I just really hope everybody keeps in mind is like the work that you put out there on your social media profiles, the work that you put out on your website, like that is the work that you're going to be known for doing. And that's going to be the work, the type of work that you're thought of. So if you want to do landscapes, you need to show that you can make some really strong landscapes. You're probably not going to be hired to do landscapes if all of your portfolio is like fashion portraits, right? And so if you want to do a type of work that you don't have a strong portfolio for, then go make that work. Like, I want to be a landscape photographer. I have a ton of experience doing fashion portraits. I don't have experience doing landscapes. You're probably not going to have a lot of success reaching out to editors saying, hey, I want to do landscapes, but I've never done landscapes before. But go make a personal project of a lot of landscapes. And then now you have a body of work. And now when you reach out to people and say that this is something that you do, you can link to it. So just like make the work that you want to make. And that's going to attract people who really appreciate you for what you love to do and for what you uniquely do.
Yes, yes, yes. That's such a great way to end today's class. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. This was recorded, so do not worry. I see someone just said they joined in late. Don't worry. This was recorded, and we'll post it both on our organization site, Black Women Photographers, and also the Everyday Projects. If you love this class, you'll also get a survey after this to get just feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like, or whatever. And you can send all your kindness and kudos or whatever to Andrea in the chat, also in that survey. Washera, did you have any other things that you wanted to mention?
We are very grateful to have had Andrea share with us some tips and tricks of the trade. And we want to welcome each and every one of you to our next class on May 19th, hosted and taught by Nikki Wu. And she's a commercial and documentary photographer. She will touch on the basics of portraiture lighting, marketing your work, as well as tailoring your portfolio to fit your clients. She'll also review 1 to 3 portfolios. So if you're interested in that, feel free to share your portfolios with us. And yeah, you can join us next week on May 19th. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Oh, I'm loving all the praise, well-deserved praise in the chat. Like one person said, your confidence is infectious. Oh, I love it. Keep the keep the comments coming. And again, if you missed the first class, that's also on our site, so you can go back and replay that conversation. Join us next week for another. And don't forget to apply for the grants from the Everyday Projects. And you have 3 days left to apply for Women Photographs grants. So go ahead and yeah, I think that is everything on our end. Thank you so much again, Andrea. You are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you all. This was really fun.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.